Well, hello, everyone. My name is Venerable Wade Panyo, and I'm with Bhante J here at Empty Cloud Monastery. Uh, this evening, we're going to live stream a Sangha panel on the topic of death. This is one of the five recollections, one of the five subjects to be frequently recollected, as indicated by the suttas, is that I am subject to dying. I have not gone beyond death. And so it's a sort of a perennial topic in Buddhism, and a topic we'll try to speak about tonight. And after each of us talks a bit about it, we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers afterward. So, Bhante, how do you feel about starting?
We should start. Okay. So, as Tan said, this is a very important subject. Right? This is a subject that we will all experience in one way or another in this lifetime. Some of us will experience it through watching friends and relatives and other people go through the dying process. And some people will be in their 70s before, a parent dies, which is an interesting experience. And so we are all subject to this, as Tan said. And one of the things that I would like to kind of discuss and have questions for during this period is to kind of think about death and how we react to it and how we interact with it, right? You kind of think about it in a practical way. If you had experiences being with people who died or people who were going through the process, etc. This is something that I'd like for us to be able to discuss during this panel. Most of you know that I have lots of experience in that, but I'm kind of tired of talking about it, especially since recently I've been talking about it a lot. But I'd like to hear from other people's, and you can also ask questions, obviously. But this is something that I think it's important what your attitude is. Right? This is your attitude and how you view the practice is very important in general. And this also fits within how you view death, right? How you view your death and how you view the death of others. How you view, terminal illness of others, how you are able or unable to be with people who are terminally ill or dying, and for what reason. It's been my experience that some people just cannot be around people who are dying. And this is understandable, especially if they don't have that experience or they have a lot of fear. Right? They really struggle to be with that experience, right? To observe. Maybe they don't even want to go to funerals. Maybe they don't want their children to go to funerals, right? All of the different ways that we have this relationship with death. And how in line with that relationship with death is the Buddha's, the Buddha's teachings, the Dhamma. How in line is our relationship with death with the Dhamma? I think that's a very important reflection that we should all do. This is one of the reasons why the Buddha wants us to reflect regularly that we are subject to death, old age, sickness, death, these divine messengers. So ideally, this is why we practice doing mindfulness of death practices, so that we can have a proper relationship with this experience, so that we can understand it, so that we can meet it. One of my favorite Dhamma talks is a talk, you can actually find it online. I found it many years ago by this Thai monastic. I guess at the time he was going through cancer, but I think he survived. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know his name. But he has a talk, it's called Death, the Final Test. And it's a wonderful Dhamma talk. it's in Thai, but it has English subtitles, about the kind of attitude that one views death. And he's saying this is the final test, and I want to pass my test with flying colors. And that's kind of part of my attitude for this as well, for death. I think that's about all I have to say, Tom.
Yeah. Okay. That's great start. It's funny, right before we went live, I said, quite honestly, I just said, I'm not really in the mood to talk about death. And then I realized in a moment later, well, actually, that's the way life is, and death comes at us when it's going to come at us, whether we're in the mood or not. And so I'm actually fortunate to still be alive and be practicing the Buddha's teachings. And actually just talking about death is quite easy compared to actually going through the process. So, and I think there's something to our initial reactions when we hear the word death, or when we think about death. There's something there that's worth paying attention to. I noticed as we were just as we went live and I started speaking to introduce the Sangha panel, I said the topic tonight will be death, and I thought, boy, I just sprung that right on everyone very quickly. It wasn't even advertised in advance, and they had no idea what they were signing on for. And here comes that big nasty word, death, immediately, and I wonder what kind of an impact that had on people hearing that right away. And so this is actually a topic that we don't really talk about in polite company usually. In worldly life, I think it's a topic we tend to tiptoe around if we can, that kind of thing. But I think if we look at, well, what kind of a reaction, what kind of an emotional reaction do we have when we hear of death or think of death? This can indicate a lot to us about how we feel about it, and project into the future, perhaps, what will it be like for us when we find ourselves in our final years, in our final months, in our final days. What kind of an emotional experience will we have? Kind of extrapolating from our reactions now to the topic. And in turn, that can indicate to us where how we may want to prepare, if we want to prepare, and this kind of thing, what kind of priorities we want. By Buddhist standards, the process of dying, whatever it is, which can be quite various, of course, is very important, because how we die is set up for us, how we live as well, of course, but also how we die can set up how we're reborn. They say that really it comes down to that final moment. The last moment before we pass away is the moment that determines what our next rebirth will be. And so if we think about that and think, well, there's quite a lot on the line there with those final moments of our life, that it will determine what our entire next lifetime will be like to a large extent. And if we think about the variety of lives that we can have in the future, then we realize, well, this is actually quite important to be prepared for death. Of course, we can, in some ways we can prepare, in some ways death is so unpredictable also, because there are such a wide variety of kind of ways that we could pass away. We could pass away suddenly in an accident, for example, suddenly due to a health problem, or it could be something that takes quite a long time even. So it's difficult to prepare physically for it, for exactly what will happen. Although we usually take some kind of strategic action. Many people will save up a retirement fund and save up fund for end of life care, for example, have health insurance, and set up a will, for example, and all these different kinds of things. But what will happen in terms of how we pass away and what kind of an experience we'll have physically is very hard to predict. We can look and see, well, how do we react to different situations in our lives now? For example, the thought of death and the topic of death, as I was talking about before, and see what kind of an emotional reaction do we have. If we really look at it, does the mind jump off somewhere else, for example, indicating that maybe there's some unwillingness to face it, or even some kind of denial, like we push it off into the future. Oh, that'll be far in the future. It's quite a relatively common thing, which may indicate a tendency towards denial, I think. So you can kind of think through this as you pay attention to this and see what kind of emotional reaction do you have. Do you feel a lot of aversion, for example, or a lot of sadness? This might indicate how you might feel in the future. And you can see how you react, as Monte J pointed out, like with other people going into this, crossing over into the next life, you might say. What kind of an experience is that for you, and what does it indicate about how your own experience might be? You also can look at the many other kinds of things that go on in your life. How do you feel when people don't pull away from a stoplight fast enough in front of you? How do you feel when they bring your food at a restaurant and it isn't cooked properly? How do you feel when somebody cuts you off in traffic? How do you feel at all the various things that happen in life? How do you feel aversion? Do you get angry easily? Are you disappointed easily when you don't get what you want? These kinds of things. And as the Thai masters would say, well, if you have difficulty dealing with this, well, how are you going to deal with old age, disease, and death? And this is quite a high standard, but it points up some things that how we react emotionally to the small things and the inconveniences and difficulties in life, and indicate how we'll feel going through the greater difficulties of old age and disease and death. And you can see if you do tend to experience quite a bit of aversion, should we practice some loving kindness meditation, for example? Should we have that as a regular meditation kind of topic? If we experience fear relatively easily, should we meditate on the qualities of the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, for example, if you find those inspiring and comforting? These kinds of things, which can be discussed with a teacher also, for planning out. This is kind of end of life planning for the heart, you might say. Whereas we have all the physical planning that we do with regard to insurances I was talking about before, and wills and so on like this, and figuring out which facility you want to be in and this kind of thing. There's also the preparation for the heart. How are we going to prepare for this? I wonder if I could pass it back to you, Bhante.
All right. Well, why don't we say hello to the people? So Gita is with us. Welcome, Rick, Chad, Norma, Jayanta, Michael, Karuna, Amaranta, Mary, Maria, Julie, Metika. Wow. So lots of people joining us and typing in the chat. Very good. Oop. Manal and Jake and Saw. Hey, there's Shadow. Shadow of Label is with us tonight. Suki, Wasabi, Priyani, Anoma. Oh, Anoma. Hello, Anoma. Miguel. Let it go, let it be. So Anoma says good morning. That's because she's in Australia. Actually, Anoma and her sister are who brought me to Australia last November. So it's nice to see Anoma on with us. All right. So I don't think I saw any questions or comments. Oh, wait. Oh. Let's see what Shadow of Label says. Is it a sin to prevent another from having access to reincarnation? Shadow, I don't think you can prevent another person from having access to reincarnation, unless you're talking about within one lifetime, like trying to make sure that they don't, die or kill themselves or something like that.
Access to reincarnation. Thinking of death as access to reincarnation. Very interesting. Okay. Right.
I don't know.
Well, they say you should let people, if someone is dying, allow them to die naturally. I think prevent them from having access to this interesting way of thinking about it. So perhaps this is kind of preventing someone from committing euthanasia, for example, or suicide or something like that. Is a bad karma to do that. Actually, I think generally the idea within Pali Buddhism, within the sutras, I think, is that actually committing suicide isn't such a good idea. that it's kind of based in, I don't know to what extent they go into this in the sutras. I remember there's one sutra where the Buddha says that if an arahant takes his own life or her own life, then it is blameless. But it's specifically about an arahant. I think the idea, the understanding of this kind of a statement is that if you take a really strong action like this, like committing suicide, for example, and it's coming from a substantial amount of aversion, and it leads to kind of a negative rebirth. It's my understanding of it, and in the euthanasia, the sense that I've gotten over the years is that this is usually considered really is coming under the first precept against killing a living being. It's my general sense of it. I wonder if you have any different sense of this.
No, I think you covered it all in terms of, I don't think I'd have anything else to add to that. But Norma has a comment, just giving an example of their experience. Death is curious to me. After my mother's death, nothing bothers me. My first death was a nun at 8. Grandfather at 2nd. I kissed him, sitting with people near the end to comfort and amuse, or sit silent and pray. Yeah, this reminds me of something. After my mother's death, nothing bothers me. This is Bhante Gunaratana, my preceptor. He's quoted as saying that when his mother died, that his last strong attachment left. So this is obviously, yes, a mother, granted, they're not like abusive and horrible towards you. Usually a mother is, and a father are going to be your strongest attachments. This is often also, well, grandparents might be because of age, grandparents, and then parents in terms of, strong deaths that people might experience. And then hopefully much less people, experiencing the death of a child and things like that. That's pretty rough. Let's see. Okay, so Rick does have a question. Most of the people I know believe in living only one life, which ends in going to heaven or hell. Others believe nothing exists after death. When someone dies, how is it wise to interact with people who don't believe in rebirth? It's a good question. Yeah. So how is it wise to interact with people? Or how do you wisely interact with people, or how is it wise? I guess that could be two different questions, actually. When it comes to dealing with other people, the idea there is not necessarily, regardless of who believes what about after death, the idea there is, how do you interact with them here in this life, right? One person can believe they go to a Christian heaven, and another person can believe they're reborn. But the idea is then, like your question is, how do you interact, right? So the question is, how do you interact, right? Does the difference in how a person feels that where they're going after death going to impact your day-to-day interaction with them? Is that something that really, needs to happen? And I remember Rick, I believe Rick is around a lot of like evangelical Christians and things like that. He's a lone Buddhist in an area. So this is something that I remember him talking about and contemplating in the past, right? So, this is something. I think it's, what is the skillful way of doing it, and how much is kind of, if you're going to get involved in worrying about what a person believes about where they're going after death, is that really worth your time? Like if somebody says, you might be around somebody and they might say, like, may you go to heaven or bless you or something like that. Do you get agitated about that, or you just say thank you or bless you too or something like that? This is a question that you might reflect on if you are, engaging with people who don't have the same views as you. Is it wise to interact with people who don't believe in rebirth? And now, to use the other end of the question, I would say, is it wise to interact with people who have extreme wrong view and who are really unskillful? And obviously the Buddha's answer is no. It's not wise to interact with such people. You should avoid them, right? Because there's no union with foolish people who are doing harmful things. You should be around as much as possible skillful people. But when you can't avoid unskillful people, then it's up to you. It's your actions, right? So you choose how you wish to interact with people. And obviously the Buddha would say that you should interact as skillfully and it's with as much mindfulness and metta as possible.
I wonder if I might add something.
Yeah.
Thank you. It occurred to me, I don't know if this might be part of the meaning of what Rick is asking, but it occurred to me, perhaps it's about how do you interact wisely with someone who is going through the death process, the dying process, if they don't believe in rebirth.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay. That's a good way of putting it.
Okay. Because if we look at that kind of specifically, then that I can, I can relate to. How do you, for example, if someone is uncomfortable about dying, if they're sad about dying, if they're experiencing negative emotions, how do you comfort them? So I might think specifically. I mean, if they're perfectly happy, then I guess it's not much of an issue. So guessing about what possible meaning of this, Rick, and so I don't know if this is relevant, but it seems to me like perhaps something useful to talk about. And because I found myself in this position to some extent, and one of the things I found with a couple of people who were passing away, one who was actually getting very old and wasn't actually in the dying process yet, another one who was actually the last days, suffering from lung cancer and in hospice care, was the idea that they hadn't accomplished anything in life. They were saying, what have I done with my life? I haven't done anything with it. And they were feeling quite disappointed with their own lives. And of course, not everyone's going to feel this way going through the dying process, but I think it may be relatively common also. And reflects, I think, to some extent how our society looks at our lives. What constitutes an accomplishment and so on. We read about big stars on the internet, for example, and read about the daily activities every hour of the President of the United States, for example, and so on like this. And we think about, and so the average person, I think, can start to think over time that the really wonderful things that they're doing day in and day out for their families and for society and everyone they come in contact with are actually quite trivial when they're not. So I think in terms of helping someone see, I hit on something with the second person I was referring to, the person who's getting much older, thinking that they'd kind of not really done anything with their lives. And I said, if you added up just in dollars, how much you got paid in all the jobs you did over the course of your life. Okay, this is just one aspect of their life. I said, if you added up how much money you made every year and totaled it up, it was millions of dollars, probably. I can't remember, but it was quite a large sum of money. And I thought, if you hadn't done anything, people wouldn't have paid you all this money. So obviously you must have done something of value. You get exactly this amount of value, how much you got paid, or you probably were underpaid, at least some of the time. So you certainly did things of value. And then if you look at the other areas of your life, and you had to quantify, in dollar terms, how much cooking you did for your children, for example, how many times you changed the oil in the family car, how many times you mowed the lawn at the house for your family, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Thinking about all the things you do, all of the kind of the psychological care you did for your spouse, just helping them work through their problems. And what if they had to pay for somebody to do all these various things that you do for the people in your life? How much would it add up to? And you can see, really, you've done a lot. You've done a lot for a lot of people, and you've led a very valuable life. And this made this person feel much, much better about their life. And so that's one thing I can pass on.
All right. So, Michael, and since this is a panel, I think it's perfectly fine for both of us to basically answer every question. We have, there's plenty of time. Michael says, how would suicide affect one's karma and reincarnation? So, suicide, along with things like mercy killing, euthanasia, etc., these are all considered killing. They're all considered the karma of killing. They might have different levels of karma, depending on intention and depending on thing, but these are all considered killing, right? And so this is not something that is ever recommended. As a matter of fact, for monastics, we literally cannot encourage all these, if we encourage somebody to commit suicide or to commit euthanasia or to have an abortion or something like that, and they went through with it, then we wouldn't be monastics anymore, right? Because that's how serious these things are taken, because this is the karma of killing. So what we would obviously, this is obviously not good karma. Now, again, is, euthanizing your dog because you don't want it to suffer the same as, being a serial killer and killing people? Probably not. Obviously the karma is probably different. But it's never something recommended. The Buddha is asked, does he approve, or did the Buddhas approve of any killing? And the Buddha says, yes, the Buddhas approve of the killing of anger, right? With its honeyed crest and poison root. So there's literally nothing, there's no justified murder or killing that the Buddha gives in the early texts. In other traditions and in different things, there in different texts, there might be some kind of interesting things. You even have Bhikkhu Bodhi, who wrote this quite controversial thing about just wars and things like that. But in the early text, the Buddha is very straightforward when it comes to this stuff. It's best to not do it. It's your choice to do it if you wish. It's your karma. But yes, these are all negative karmas that it's best that you avoid if possible.
I think that's great. Yeah. Okay.
Anome asks, how can we prepare for our death without fear?
It's a great question, a very, very, very important question, I think. And well, I can give a few different ideas come to mind. One idea is that it's helpful to know, to some extent, I think, what it is you're afraid of about death, and to kind of be able to look at that. And if you have a meditation practice, this is so helpful. If you can meditate and make the mind calm, and then sometimes bring up the idea of death and think and notice, how do you feel about it? I mean, if you're feeling fear, try to pay attention and sit with it in a very kind of observant way, in an open way, and try to see what is it that I fear about death. And once you come to a good understanding of that over time, then to recognize that an emotion like fear or aversion or denial, these kinds of things, they all have at root some kind of attachment. Ajahn Sumedho, disciple of Ajahn Chah, once said that one part of his training in his early years as a monk was he'd say to himself, when he found himself suffering, he look and say, okay, I'm suffering. That means I'm attached to something. What is it I'm attached to? And becoming aware of that with mindfulness can be very effective in terms of helping the mind let go. And slowly over time, practicing in this way, being aware of what it is and letting go, the heart becomes much more at ease about it. You may see that the fear fades and fades and fades. A very productive kind of practice. So when you get into a situation where you think you may be dying, you feel so much calmer. Fernando, you respond to me?
Yeah, I think that was covered well. And the only thing I would add is that the way you prepare for death is the way you prepare for everything. Practice, right? You reflect that you're going to die. You know, this is tomorrow. I might not. The Buddha tells us, mindfulness of death sutta 2. When you go to bed, you reflect. There are many ways that I may die tonight. Right? And then you wake up in the morning. There are many ways that I may die today. So if you're reflecting on all the different ways that you can die, and you're kind of preparing your mind, and you're really training and practicing in that, then, well, when it happens, I can't guarantee that there will be no fear, but you'll probably at the very least be much more prepared and have less fear. So I think that's one of the reasons why the Buddha has us do these practices. Chad says, "What's the topic?" The topic is death. You probably know that by now. So Amaranta has, how important is it to die conscious? Is it true that if you lose consciousness before dying is not good, or is this just a Tibetan belief?
That's it. It really seems like, actually, it's funny. I haven't really thought about this too much specifically, but it really seems to me, my gut reaction is it really would be much better to be conscious. The recommendation in the suttas is to try to die with mindfulness, to have mindfulness well established when you're passing away, and to die unconfused. And being unconscious is certainly going to be a state of delusion, I think, and not good for the dying process, which is very important implications, I think, because so many people would pass away unconscious. It's interesting, though, in all these years, I haven't heard any specific teachings on this. I wonder.
No, yeah, me neither.
It's quite. Yeah. I think actually a related thing that I had thought about, that struck me as being very important, is the effect of different pain medications. They say that commonly used pain medications oftentimes actually over time increase the pain that we experience because of the effect they have on the nervous system over time. And so people end up taking larger and larger doses and stronger medications until people at the end of life may be taking narcotics, for example, that have quite relatively intoxicating effects on them. And I think passing away in a state of mind, is kind of intoxicated with narcotics, is also got to be a really bad way to go. Of course, we may not have control over whether we're conscious or unconscious, and so we just have to do our best with the situation we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I mean, and what also is covered in here is sleeping. Somebody might pass away in their sleep; they're unconscious. That's you might not have a choice for that. Yeah, I don't know. I've heard the last moment and things like that, but I've never heard dying conscious. That's in it. That's the first one for me. I've not heard that before.
Yeah. Seems like a really important point. So common. Yeah. Yes, Kobe.
I have a question regarding if the suttas say anything about the time period between death and the next rebirth, and where consciousness goes in between death and rebirth.
Mm-hmm. I have. I don't recall ever seeing anything in the suttas, except just one reference. I think it is. This is this pretty vague about this topic. Interestingly, yeah, this is in the Pali Suttas anyway. Because there's quite a big, quite a substantial teaching about it, as I understand it, in Tibetan Buddhism, about the different bardos, for example, you go through in the dying, after dying and before the next rebirth, and so on, which I have never studied. But there's a reference in the suttas apparently to a sampavesi in one sutta about someone who hasn't found a body yet and is sustained by craving, as it says in the sutta. But it isn't very well defined. And my understanding is that according to the Theravadan doctrine, kind of, it was established with the commentaries in Sri Lanka, is that it's like actually there is no interim period, that you go directly from one body to another body with no interim at all. So I have heard folklore that amongst the Thai meditation teachers, they say that actually It can be like a sambawesi if you don't have enough merit to get a body, and you find yourself bodiless but craving a body, craving being able to do things. For example, this one you can express yourself through a body with doing things and experiencing sensual pleasures and so on like this. And also that many people may find themselves falling into a state like a ghost rebirth for some period of time, even if it's very long, for coming back up as a human rebirth. But so there are a variety of teachings. If we go by the church doctrine, though, if you will, the traditional doctrine of the Theravada tradition, though, it's that you go directly from one body to the other. Yeah.
So Keith says, perhaps the most challenging thing is accepting that we have no insight on death. We have no authority over it, faculty to see beyond it, and this causes us to cling to notions of it. Yeah.
I think here one thing is sometimes sometimes meditators, meditation masters will point to the processes of cause and effect that we see in our daily lives, going from 1 minute to the next, 1 hour to the next, 1 day to the next. And we can observe over time how our emotions affect our actions, what kind of consequences our actions bring for us, both physically but also emotionally as well. If we pay attention to these cause and effect relationships, we can see that there are skillful ways of action and unskillful ways of action that affect our mental states, how we feel, and so on. The effects of emotions also include physical effects, and our physical states often affect our emotions. So there's quite a bit of interplay between the mind and the body, our emotions and the body, and so on. And so if we pay attention to this over time, over the days and months and years of our life, we can see how there are certain cause and effect patterns in place. And even if we don't know whether there's a future rebirth or not, we can take some advice, for example, from the Kalama Sutta, where the Buddha addresses this topic. He says, Kalamas, you don't know whether there's a next life or not. But if there are consequences of good and bad actions, and there is a next life, then if you act skillfully in this life, then you're covered both ways, both in this life and in the next. And so it's a very pragmatic kind of teaching.
Karuna is talking about the death moment again, this interesting topic. The importance of the final death moment. If it's possible to direct our thought, what should we be trying to do? Like when I think I'm going to get run over on the street, I try to put my mind on the breath. Yeah, well, there are definitely suttas where the Buddha, the part of it is like the person is thinking about like metta or something, and they will go to that, to the Brahma realm or to the corresponding realm. It's an interesting topic. Like what brings this to mind is when I fly, especially when I get a window seat, which is the best, I'll often, like when I'm looking out the window, I'll think about, suppose right now I get sucked out and I have a minute to go before I hit the ground. What do I do?
You're a cheerful fellow.
I reflect on this all the time. On a 5-hour flight, I might reflect on this at least maybe 30, 40 times. Like what's like the best thing to do for that last moment while you're going down? Should I do metta? Should it be mindfulness of breathing? But the interesting thing about it is when you're in a situation like that, oftentimes you click into something. It will happen how it happens, right? So I don't know what would be, if I'm, going, as an old song I used to love about skydiving called High Speed Dirt. If I'm high speed dirt and about to, hit the ground, what do I think? I don't know. I have a bunch of options, and however that, in those last moments, what will arise will arise. I guess.
Right. your mind, it will depend on kind of what you practice with, I think, and you can have a mind towards that as you're thinking. I think this is really, really wise, thinking about it a little bit, like with your scenario of what you get sucked out the window. It's just, it's actually, yeah. If you think about, if you develop your meditation practice, along those lines, what seems to work for you? That if you were in a situation where you were able to have the presence of mind to meditate to some extent, then what could you go to? It's good to have a go-to plan, I think. So you have some practice with it and so on. But of course, we'll see what happens when we get there too. You can't be you expect too much to be prepared too much, And so even though we can't control what we'll be thinking about, if we practice, put time into the practice now and develop an affinity for a particular kind of meditation subject, then it can help us at least to have some options, have something to know to go to. Of the 3 or 4 or 5 things we might skillful mental kind of activities we might have.
Mm-hmm.
Mindfulness of the breath, is great. One of the common one that's referred to in amongst the meditation masters in Thailand is recollecting good things you've done. They say that this serves as a platform for good rebirth. And another one is recollecting the Buddha, the Dhamma, or the Sangha. This can be good for rebirth as well. And so if you practice breath meditation regularly, and if you find also that one of the other ones also resonates with you, then you could have a variety of meditation techniques to practice with in case you find yourself with the opportunity to practice them in going through the dying process. And a variety of tools to use for to work with different mental states that arise.
Noam is just saying most people can't talk about death or poop. I guess that's uptight. No, well, there's fear and disgust. Those are strong human emotion. Oh, this one's a bit more positive. How should one go about meditating on the subject of spiritual friendship, recollecting our friends and aspiring to become a wise friend, to reduce loneliness and increase self-esteem, and reflect on that all your friends are going to die? Oh no, I didn't. I added that.
Wow,
this is a very good question.
Should we meditate on spiritual friendship? There's a sutta. I'm not very well prepared to talk about this, I have to admit. We'll have to think about it a bit. There is a sutta on what are the qualities of a good friend. For example, a good friend is someone who can do things that are difficult to do. And someone who will be with you, I think, roughly along the idea of they'll be with you through good times and through bad times. Someone who can keep confidences, I think. So if you share something with them, they won't spread it around if it's something private, for example. These are a few things that I remember reading in the suttas. Wondering, do you remember any? Is this kind of scriptural reference ring a bell with you, Bhante? Do you remember any other? I think there are more points than that. It's something that could be found in the sutras under the topic of friendship, of course. Mm-hmm. And so, if we think about, some of the perhaps meditating on it, if we were to meditate on what are some of the most wonderful experiences we've had in relation to our friends, being good friends to us, and reflect on that and think about, can we develop our own qualities to kind of match that? If we found that there was a friend of ours who was especially generous with us, which I think is actually another quality of good friends, someone who's generous. Do we find that quality in ourselves? And if we do, then we can feel quite good about that. And this is I get this idea from the meditation on devas, wherein the Buddha says you can meditate on the qualities of devas and consider that you have those qualities as well. And so you can see, well, if you also feel like you've been generous to friends, and this is something that would be quite gladdening to you, make you feel quite good, quite satisfied inside. You can also reflect on, well, are there opportunities for me to develop in generosity as a friend, if you want to develop in that way? Am I somebody who's there for my friends in difficult times? And if you are, then that can make you feel quite good as well. And it's also something to consider. Well, is this something that I can work on to be an even better friend, for example? Those are some ideas that I have that come to me now. Okay.
All right, good. Chad, the specific karma that determines our next birth, is that decided at the time of death, or is it chosen when the specific action is done? If the latter, can it be changed throughout the course of life? So I would say in the suttas, it's not the karma that determines the next birth could be right from your previous life, but it also cannot be. So it depends. Right? We shouldn't automatically think, well, I was good in this life, so the next life I go to heaven. That's not always the case. Right? Maybe you have past karma from 1,000 lifetimes ago, and you go to the Deva realm, a Peta realm, or a hell realm, or something. Right? So this is not always the case. This is why, like Bhante Gunaratana, my preceptor, will say, at the very least, you should try to become a stream mentor. This way you have a money back guarantee, no more hell realms, no more animal realms, right? So in many ways, if you go by the suttas, yes, there are examples of something done right then and there also leading to, because this is why, for instance, going back to my thought about like falling out of the plane, I think like, well, because there's a sutta like you practice. If I was practicing metta in the last couple of minutes, would that mean I go to the Brahma realm? Like, I don't want to go to the Brahma realm. Maybe I want to like maybe I can become an arhat by the time I hit the ground or something like that. Maybe I should reflect on impermanence or, something to that effect. I mean, I don't know. But I think it's good to not get too obsessed with the time of death. I really do. Tan was actually kind of speaking to this. This is what I've heard, like, for instance, for like Bhante Ji, like, and others will say, if you want your last moments to be full of metta, well, you need to practice lots of metta throughout your life. Like, right. Setting up that doing what you are doing, right. That habit you are building is what will arise at that time. So.
It says in the suttas that the karma is one of those what is it called? One of those unfathomable topics. It says in the suttas, if you try to figure out karma, your head will split into several pieces. Like your head will explode because it's so difficult to understand the workings of karma, exactly how things will play out, and only a Buddha can actually do it. So there's the teaching on like your where you'll be reborn. Your next life comes down to the last moment, the last mental state of this life. But I think that teaching is about emphasizing that it's more about like as we're going through the dying process, that it's very beneficial to have the mental skills to look after your mind as you're going through it, and then that's kind of the point of that teaching.
All right. So Manal has an interesting question. She's bringing up something that we read at the end of the Mahaparinibbana Sutta. In this morning's the Mahaparinibbana Sutta discussion, you mentioned something, well, the Sutta mentioned, I was reading the Sutta, about the Buddha saying that anybody who died while on pilgrimage to the place where the Buddha passed would themselves be born into a higher life form in the next life. Will you please expand on this? Would a person's karma be a significant factor as well, or is this completely overridden? I think this is kind of, we just already answered this. The Buddha does say that, so I don't know if because a lot of times you have to be careful of what like the Buddha says. Sometimes it's not like he doesn't specifically say the next life. He just says we'll be born in heaven. So I don't know, not looking at the sutta directly off the top of my head. But the Buddha does say that obviously that if you die during the pilgrimage, that, heaven is a destination. So I don't know.
Hearing the stories from pilgrims who've been there, I've never been to the holy sites in India, but it sounds like such an amazing experience for those who have faith in Buddhism. Mm-hmm. I hear they talk about finding it so moving and such intensely positive emotions when they're there, that even though I've never been there, I'm sure it must be a really wonderful spiritual experience. And so, probably very, very powerful karma. Yeah. So I encourage it. So, yeah. Just on reports of others, I'd like to encourage other people who have an inclination towards that kind of thing to go for it and see what it's like for yourself. It's probably a very rewarding experience.
Well, and again, as I said, there are examples in the suttas of people basically being reborn directly because of what happened. So I think it can be both, right? It can be either or. As Tan brought up about, we cannot know the full workings of karma unless we're fully awakened, being or Buddha.
I think it's great what you said about attaining sotapanna, because that's really the solution, I think, for these kinds of things. Because it was earlier when someone asked about how do we work with fear in relation to death, one of the answers that popped into my head was, if you attain sotapanna, then you don't have to be afraid.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah.
Very true. Yeah. So, and it's I think it's worth pointing out, as Bhante J did, this is really, really the solution you want to go for. And that it's and also like to encourage people that if you put a lot of time into your meditation practice, if you go on retreat, I sometimes encourage people, if you can, spend a whole year in a monastery at one time, if you can, or on retreat in some kind of a situation where you really get to put time into keeping precepts and meditating. I did when I was an 8 preceptor at Abhayagiri Monastery years ago, before I ordained. I even as an 8 preceptor, I was what they call an anagarika, and staying at the monastery, I got to meditate quite a lot, like the monks did, and so on, and the novice monks. And by the end of a year there, I told people at the monastery it was the best year of my life. And I think that if you put one, you go to a meditation center or a monastery for a year and practice, it's actually, if you think about it, it's actually a very small portion of your life. But I think you'll find it's really the most rewarding. And that even if you don't attain sotapanna, perhaps you may, but if you don't, you're sure making a lot of very powerful good karma will help you on the way. So I'd like to make a pitch for that.
All right. And Abhayagiri is an amazing place. I've only spent a couple weeks there. I haven't spent a year there, but yeah, it's a really cool place to be. All right. Chandrini says, Bhante, you included euthanasia in your answer about not killing. Would you understand signing a negative consent as family members for ventilatory support, so ventilator, intubation, as at the hospital as killing? So mostly I would say no. It depends on the situation. But when you're dealing with something like, mostly what would happen, so 100 years ago, what would happen is the person would most likely die, right? But modern science is able to keep them alive longer, right? And if they have a do not resuscitate, like, that's not suicide, that's not killing themselves, right? That's a very different thing here. So not accepting like kind of modern science or something extra is not necessarily the same as killing. This is an important distinction. Now, there might be 1 or 2 situations where it gets a bit iffy. Like, maybe they're brain dead, maybe not. Should we keep them on the ventilator? Should we take them out? It might get a little iffy there. But even that, maybe it really gets into a lot of interesting gray areas, because these are not issues that the people had to deal with at the time of the Buddha. Right? There's no Buddhist giving a teaching about what to do about ventilators. So we have to kind of take it with our own intuition, our own practice, our own understanding. Of course, asking the opinions of like you're asking our opinion on this. It's a good way of doing it as well. But no, I would say that that's not considered euthanasia per se, right? Because euthanasia would be, I'm going to probably live another couple of years. It's just going to be suffering. I just want to end it now, right? Like back when I was in my teenage years, Dr. Kevorkian was very famous, right? This was the doctor who, if you wanted to, if it was, you're right, and you were in pain, or you were older and you just wanted to die, you'd call him up and he'd come over and he'd inject something into you, and then you'd die peacefully, right? That's euthanasia. That's very different than I got into an accident. The medical science is keeping me alive. Is it killing if I, as a family member, as somebody who, and this is something I actually have had to make a choice on for a loved one. So I understand that to that point. No, that's not really killing. Right? Like that's something else. But it's it is a complicated subject in some ways.
It's kind of a difference, I think, between if you can look at the situation, is it allowing the person to pass away kind of naturally, considering the state of their body, kind of thing, or is it intervening to cut their life shorter than it would end, kind of on its own if it were left to be kind of a natural for the situation. That's one way of looking at it.
So Rick, I don't know. I guess this is just one question, but so I heard a Dhamma talk from a Thai monk in the Ajahn Chah lineage. He said that monks from the West live under an unnecessary pressure because they believe they only had one life to get enlightened. Bhantes, can you share some reflections on how our beliefs about death can impact our practice? Well, that is an interesting thing. I don't know that I think that Western monks think that they only have one life, but I think that if you've gotten to the point where you want to ordain and you've developed enough nibbida, you don't want to come back again. So there is this kind of, and I do think there's this kind of, I don't want to say misplaced zealotry, but a kind of ignorance of zealotry. I went through this. I can remember for years just having this strong zealotry desire. I'm going to become awakened in this lifetime. And then there's this kind of dawning insight. It was like, well, wait a second. Like, there's all kinds of factors that will decide if I become awakened in this lifetime. One of them being my own practice and how dedicated and how sincere I practice. But that's only one factor. There could be all kinds of karmic factors that mean that I don't become awakened in this lifetime. Right? So I think that kind of wisdom arises if they've survived in the robes enough, and they've gone deep enough in the practice. I've seen lots of young guys kind of have this zealotry of doing this, and they often don't last long in the robes. They have disrobed in my experience. So that's what I would say about that.
How our beliefs about death can impact our practice. So on the topic of so similar to, what if you think you only have one life, for example?
Yes,
how would it impact your practice? Okay, sorry, it took me a moment. What do you think? So, again, it depends about. I'm thinking through this a little bit. If you think you only have one life, so therefore it doesn't really matter. On the other hand, not that you really have to attain enlightenment in this life because you only have one life, for example. But on the other hand, if you think that there isn't much reason to practice too hard, because after all, we only have this one life. We're not reborn again, which is a general fault of the belief that we don't have a future life. That therefore, what's the point of really doing anything good or doing anything I don't want to do? If we just disappear when we die anyway. So it's an obvious potential problem with believing we don't have a future life. But I think that if we have this point of view, if we really don't believe that there is a future life, that we can again look kind of what I was saying before about the idea of rebirth in general, about looking at the cause and effect relationships now, in terms of how spiritual practice in general, whether it's giving or keeping precepts or meditating, has a positive impact on your life in the here and now. Modern scientists say everyone should be meditating at least 20 minutes a day because it's good for you. It's good for your physical health, and over time you become more intelligent and a happier person because you're much better able to understand your emotions and manage your emotions. And also, your emotional intelligence, your EQ, increases with regard to other people as well. So you become much more skillful in interacting with them. So there's so many benefits. I've heard about benefits from both something like breath meditation and loving kindness meditation. And so, if you put some practice time in on an ongoing basis, you'll see cumulatively over the years more and more benefit from it for yourself, even just in this life.
All right. Gayatri says, I've been thinking a lot about death, some past triggered, but I want to use this in a positive sense. How can I do Maranasati meditation? Is there a time of day, etc.? Any advice? I would say the best thing to start out, you can get into parts of the body and charnel ground contemplation and all that, but the best thing to start out with is the 5 subjects of contemplation. Start doing that every day, at least once a day, right? They're doing that reflection. I'm subject to old age. I'm subject to illness. I'm subject to death. I'll be separated from everyone and everything that I hold dear. I'm the owner of my actions. As you reflect on that often, over and over and over and over and over and over again, that will impact how you live. That will impact how you choose to act. And okay, well, I'm subject to old age, sickness, death. So is everybody else. So what's the best way for me to live? What's the best way for me to act? It's a way of, it builds up urgency and it guides you towards what is skillful, reflecting that these are actual facts. These are actual truths. This will happen. And you can observe your mind over time, how it's just in such denial about it, even while you're doing this practice. I always tell the story about how I was doing this, reflecting these 5 things in front of a skeleton, at Bhavana. And I don't think when this happened, I was a monk yet. Maybe I was an Anagarika or a Samaneri. But either way, I had been doing this practice for well over 10 years by that point. And I'm going through, I'm subject to death. And I lost my mindfulness. And then I heard my mind say, I am exempt from death. And I said, you stupid mind. You think how many years have we been doing this? You still think you're exempt? Right? Because we're so deluded. We have so much delusion, so much ignorance that we have to keep reflecting on these things regularly for years before it really starts to impact us. So I think that's really the kind of the best place to start, because when you get into these, especially if you've gone most of your lifetime not reflecting on death and old age and sickness and the body and all this kind of stuff, it's going to bring up fear. It's going to bring up disgust, and you're going to have to kind of bear with that, right? But once you practice over long term, that goes away, and what's left is peace. What's left is wisdom. It's like, yes, yeah, this is true. Of course, I could die today. That's the nature of things. I might not make it. Yeah. And then maybe, just maybe, when you're flying, you'll start to think, what would happen in the last moment? Oh, yeah. So that's my just thoughts on that one. Time.
Yeah, so the five subjects for frequent recollection is such a fundamental practice. It's the one set of recollections in the suttas where the Buddha says, everybody, absolutely everybody, should do this frequently. And so, yeah, it's when this is a fundamental practice for the Buddhist faithful. The one aspect of Marananusati, or mindfulness of death, is that it brings up a sense of heedfulness. And so if we ever find ourselves feeling kind of lazy, for example, or tired even, or feeling, or if we become kind of heedless, like we think, well, I'd rather go out and have some fun instead of doing my regular meditation practice. Or rather just go eat a tub of ice cream and watch TV instead of meditating. If we recollect, that we're subject to dying, at a time specifically like that, it can be very helpful to bring up a sense of urgency, really, of feeling like, well, actually, I should do my meditation practice because it'll really help have good benefits for me and put things in perspective. And this is how it's kind of brought up in the sutras, this connection between Marananusati and heedfulness. That it'll spur you on a bit and give you some more energy to practice. Thinking about that, it's practicing in kind of a smaller way than what Bhante is talking about, an alternative.
Mm. So
you can, if you make the mind really calm. Another way of practicing is if you have another meditation subject that you frequently practice with, you find you really is able to make your mind calm. Then if you make your mind calm and it feels very stable, then you can bring up Marananusati then, for example. So say you usually practice with breath meditation, and you make the mind very calm this way, and then bring up the topic of death. It might be just the idea of death, or, for example, an image that reminds you of death. Say, for example, like the image of a human skull, for example. Or the image of someone dying. Then this is actually kind of a vipassana practice with regards to death, once the mind is already very calm. And this can have this could be a tremendous learning experience for the heart as you go through this. So that's another time to bring up death when the mind is already very calm, even from another meditation object.
So Chad just has a comment question. I imagine that dying on pilgrimage at holy sites leads to a higher life because you're in a constant state of Buddha-nusati there.
Okay, right, sure.
So, Tan, this is a test for you.
Is this all in Thai?
Are you able to read Thai script?
Oh, my Thai is so terrible.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. Okay, so Chandani's, I guess, has a follow-up on the ventilator thing. We were informed that once the ventilator is introduced to the patient, he did not have an accident. He was in an advanced stage of dementia. That removal of it afterwards is considered illegal. Interesting.
That's who I am. I wonder how far that goes. Anyway. Yeah. Okay.
My understanding of ventilators and intubation is like it's supposed to be used as a kind of a life support for people who would be able to survive and thrive afterwards. Like it's like a temporary thing, and then like you have an accident. Because I know one of my ex girlfriends actually had an accident, and she was intubated. She was on a machine for a while. And then she got off. She eventually died from her wounds. But this was something that was kind of used, to try to keep the person alive so that their body could heal and then be taken off of it. I'm not familiar with, this is an advanced stage of dementia. I would assume this is close to death, but dementia can be for years. So I'm not sure. This would be, you know what, this would be a great question for Aya Suvijana, who was a nurse.
Right.
That would be a great question for her to answer something like that.
We can go now. Yeah, see, here in the monastery.
Karuna has, I guess, one of my lay teachers from a sutta, I don't know, where we developed mindfulness of death by appreciating this day, this hour, this breath. But I can't remember what it is. I think it might be Majjhima Nikaya. Do you have any idea what this might be? Oh yeah, I know what this is. It's not what you think it is. Maybe they interpret it in a different way. This is if you Google, if you go on Sutta Central and you type in mindfulness of death 1, that's what this is. And so in this sutta, which is a hilarious sutta, the Buddha says you should practice mindfulness of death. It's of great fruit. And a monk goes, oh, I practice mindfulness of death. And so the Buddha says, how do you practice mindfulness of death? Well, I practice, if only for a day and a night, I would follow the Buddha's teachings. It would be very beneficial. And then the monks start having this, they start having this kind of, like competition. Who can think of mindfulness of death the best? And then another one goes, oh, I think of mindfulness of death. And then it's only for a day. And then, oh, I think of mindfulness of death, and it's for half a day. Oh, I think of mindfulness of death, and it's for, I think it's like the time it takes to complete a meal. Oh, I think of mindfulness of death as for the time it takes to have 3 spoonfuls. Oh, I think. So it goes all the way down to the time it takes to breathe in, having breathed out, or to breathe out, having breathed in, or to have one morsel of food. Right. And so then the Buddha says, basically the Buddha says, everybody who I forgot exactly where he cuts it off, but it's basically like 3 morsels of food and above, you're all living heedlessly. Like if you don't think of mindfulness of death. So it was basically like the people who are like half of a breath, an in-breath or an out-breath, or half of a morsel, then you're being mindful of death. So that's where this is coming from. It's not appreciating the day or the hour. That's not something that's part of it. But that's the sutta. And it's just, I always get a kick out of this sutta because it's like, it reminds me of like students in class trying to one up each other. Oh, I think of mindfulness death in even shorter of a period of time. But yeah. Anything?
I think it's pretty good. I feel like to think about that sutta more actually. So I'll have to. That's a great reference. Thank you, Dr. J.
Rick says that. Okay, so this is a question. I have plenty of experience with death. In my teens, I worked helping bury people. I have been present, supporting family members when they died. Why might I feel deeper grief when my dogs, cats, or horses die than when people die? I think I know this one because I know Rick enough to know. It's because of all the trauma you've had from people, right? You've had lots of trauma. People have treated you quite poorly. Right. I think this is a very common thread through a lot of people who kind of feel closer to animals than humans. Right. So you make this bond, and you make this bond with an animal who, I mean, I guess they can, give you some kind of bond back. And some people say it's love, and some people say, I don't know. It's one of those things. But I think my answer would be it's because of the trauma related to other humans that you've experienced. That would be my answer. Why maybe you don't hold humans as in high regard as you do animals, especially also, I think, because you do have concerns about humans in relation to the environment and how we destroy things and etc. So it's kind of easier to think, how do you feel about human babies? investigate that. It might be related to like an innocent thing, right? Adult humans are this and this and this, but animals, dogs and cats, they're innocent. They're so nice and they're so kind. And, then I have grief when they die. Maybe it's the same thing with human babies. They're also kind of innocent and such too. But I guess that's my answer. I don't know if Tan, if you read anything different in this, maybe you have something.
I don't know, ripple on if I think, why does he feel this way or that way? That's
Yeah.
Interesting question.
Yeah. So Julie has a question, but we've kind of answered this already. Is the way we die determined before our next life? Is it accidental or results of exhausting all of our karma?
Before our next life. Is the way we die determined before our next life? Yeah. Well, yes. I think the answer to the first question is definitely yes. Is the way we die determined before our next life? Because I don't know if maybe I don't understand the question, because we die before our next life anyway. It has to be determined before. So, okay. Sorry, Julie. Maybe we had to understand the question. Is it accidental or results from exhausting all of our karma? Apparently, actually, my understanding is that the Theravada doctrine is that you cannot exhaust all of your past karma. And so, teaching one of the meditation masters in Thailand, they have such a vast quantity of karma from the beginningless, or perhaps beginningless round of rebirths that we won't exhaust it all. That when even when an enlightened being dies and goes to nirvana, that it's not that they're not reborn because they don't have any more karma. It's that they're not reborn because they know well enough not to come back. That they're wise enough not to come back. They don't form an urge. They don't have the urge for becoming or non-becoming. They don't form an intention for becoming or not becoming at all. And so therefore they don't come back. It doesn't have to do with whether or not they have previous karma. But death apparently can be accidental. Apparently not everything comes down to karma. So on the other side of it, there's actually a sutta where the Buddha is talking about this, that he says that, for example, if you take illness can be caused by a wide variety of different kinds of things, such as an imbalance in the elements is one way that they understood it in the time of the Buddha in terms of illness. And even some modern health practitioners understand it that way from different modalities. It could be an imbalance in the elements, for example. And accidents can happen, and or death can be caused by your karma too. So it's actually quite a wide variety of ways things can happen in that regard.
Gayatri has a funny quote. It says, "Thanks, Bantes, for your thoughts. Driving 2 hours each way on the Garden State Parkway every day is a good near-death experience." Boy, that's a heck of a lot. I'm from New Jersey. I know a lot of people who do that commute back and forth to New York. It's a lot of time to reflect, a lot of time to listen to Dhamma talks, and yes, a lot of time to almost die from car accidents. So maybe, do you know this, Bhante? Julius, is there a sutta that speaks of how Sariputta died?
My understanding is it's not in the suttas, but it's in the commentaries.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, quite an amazing story. But the story is, or should we get into the story? I love the story.
Sure, yeah, tell me. Yeah. Why not?
The story is that the Venerable Sariputta, one of the two chief disciples of the Buddha, had several brothers who all actually ordained as well, and all also attained arhatantship. One of them was also another one of the top 80 arhats, Revata. But their mother was a devoted worshiper of Brahma and not a Buddhist. And close to the time of death, Sariputta went to his mother's house, apparently knowing that he was going to pass away. And while he was at his mother's house, she was with him. And towards the very end of his life, in the night, one by one, devas came down. I shouldn't say just one by one, but in groups, devas came down from the heavens at various levels, from higher and higher levels of the heavens, more and more glorious and shining devas and groups of devas coming down to pay their respects to Sariputta, bowing to him multiple times, worshiping him as their last opportunity to do so, until finally the great Brahma himself came down from heaven, descended before Sariputta, and got down on his hands and knees and worshipped Sariputta right there in front of Sariputta's mother. And so as the Brahma took his leave and rose up into the heavens again, Venerable Sariputta's mother turned to him and asked her son, who was that? And so he told his mother that it was the great Brahma come down to worship him. And this was the cause of his mother's conversion to Buddhism, as the story goes, before he passed into Parinibbana.
Well, thank you for that, Tom. I don't know that I've heard that before. I mean, it might be in that the great disciples of the Buddha. I don't know if it's in there or not, but yeah, that's a really cool story. Yeah. And we've pretty much come to the end. There's no more questions, and we're at 53. So maybe we can call it a night.
Sure. I'd like to say anumodana to everyone who has viewed the live stream and thought about it and asked questions. Sadhu anumodana, your Dhamma practice, all of which I think we feel on some level or other will help us in this life and help us as we go through the challenges of old age, disease, and death, and into the next life as well for those of us who believe in it. I think this is time well spent thinking about a topic that most people don't really want to think about or talk about. And so anumodana is a way we say from the Pali of we rejoice in the goodness of your practice, and in turn this is good karma for those of us who anumodana your practice. And so thank you for taking part in this process that we've had this evening of talking about death, doing this very skillful thing. I think it's rewarding for all of us, those who are listening, and those of us who are teaching as well. And hope you all continue to prosper in your Dhamma practice. And okay. Maybe I should take a moment to announce that tomorrow morning we have a sutta study. Is that right?
Yes.
Sui is doing a sutta study by live stream. That'll be at 8 a.m. in the morning. And tomorrow night we have monk chat. So this will be Bhante J and I again. We'll be taking questions on any topic of Buddhism. Recommend also catching, if you can, if you didn't see it already, Bhante J's sutta studies on the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which he did this morning and last night. It should be on the YouTube channel, Empty Cloud YouTube channel. It's actually what gave me the idea to do. I suggested doing death for the topic tonight for the Sangha Panel, was his sutta studies on the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, the story of the Buddha's passing away. Saturday night we have a Dhamma session. In person here, a public Dhamma session at Empty Cloud from 6 to 7:30. Bhante J will be leading that. And on Sunday, a long Dhamma session from 1 to 4, open to the public. Sui Jana will be leading that one. As plans stand, I will be departing Empty Cloud Monastery on Saturday in the morning. And so tomorrow, so I'll say goodbye to everyone now. And thank you for all of the questions and insights you've shared on the live streams, and all those of you who've come to the monastery as well. It's been a real pleasure, a real joy to be here at Empty Cloud Monastery and see what a wonderful community you all have, and have a chance to take part in it.
Thank you, Tom, for all that you've done while you were here. Thank you. All right, friends. So that's it. Have a good night.
Goodbye.